And we are here at Michigan Sports Media Network. Welcome back to episode 3. As usual, we have Brad Thompson, our lead Tigers reporter, and James Gullett, our lead Red Wings reporter. We're going to pivot now to the Lions and NFL, and we don't really have too much more, or too much as much as usual, I should say, because usually we spend taking about an hour or 45 minutes or so talking Lions in the NFL. Today, it's going to be quite a bit shorter than that. So just to get started, Derek Barnes re-signed, and since it's just me and you, we can kind of go back and forth on all of these different things. But Derek Barnes re-signed. He got a good deal, I think. It was a little bit more than I would have liked to pay, but also, take into account the cap is rising. That $8.5 million is going to look a lot more like $5 million come next season. Which is what I was expecting for him. Now, a lot of people are confused. Why'd we bring him back in the first place? Well, we don't really have a Sam linebacker. And although the three linebacker sets are dying in the, the three linebacker sets are dying in the NFL. But the Lions like to use them quite a bit, and I think that's really the reason why we brought Barnes back. We really didn't have a guy that could play that spot last season. In signing him to a 3-year, I believe it was $25.5 million total, $8.5 million per year, isn't really that bad, especially when you think about it. Like, he had the game-sealing pick at Ford Field for our first playoff win in forever, or not first. He had the Bucks. It was the Bucks game. So it was our second playoff win in 30 years. But he sealed that game, and he's been a really good young player for us. And although, don't get me wrong, if if I had to choose between re-signing Derek Barnes and trading for, Myles Garrett or something, I'm going, why are we even questioning this? Why is this even something to talk about? So if it comes down to it, and we're about $10 million away from going and getting a Trey Hendrickson or Myles Garrett, I'll be a little upset because it seems like this deal might have been what stopped us from doing that. But again, I don't hate the deal. It's not a bad deal. It is what it is. But with that being said, do you have anything on the Derek Barnes signing?
Nothing that's going to be popular, but I don't really care about that, to be honest. Um, he's a decent player. I'm not going to say he's bad because he's not. He is a decent player. But I feel like we just gave him way too much money. I kind of, in my head at least, compare him to like a Jonah Jackson. Like, okay, yeah, he's solid. I want him on my team, no problem. But 8.5 a year for a backup linebacker is nuts, in my opinion. Um, we do, at least, let me rephrase, because in Aaron Glenn's system, which I am assuming that Shepard is going to adopt most of, or at least a chunk of, that's what the team's familiar with, that's what he coached under, et cetera, et cetera. But we had a base 4-2-5 formation, so we only started two linebackers, and that's Anzalone and Campbell. So I don't know where Barnes fits into that. I know you said we don't have a true Sam, and I mean that is true. You're not wrong. But I don't pay a guy that's not playing 50% of the snaps or more, or I should say, or less, 8.5 a year. Like you said, I know the cap's going up and all that, but I'm trying to, in my head, re-sign Davis. I'm talking to JMO about contract extensions. I'm talking to Hutchinson about contract extensions. So as well as while I don't mind that Barnes is back at all, I would like him back. That's just, in my opinion, a hefty price tag for someone that's not a like blue chip building block of this defense. I would have much rather got a cheaper backup option and then go after, like you said, a Trey Hendrickson or Harold Landry, who um, I'm sure we'll talk about in the future, but he might be my main target now that he's flat cut as much as I do think Hendrickson or Garrett or and all them guys are better. If you're telling me you can still get a dang good pass rusher who's also young, or at least youngish, and you only have to give him money. You don't have to give up any draft capital to get him. You don't have to do anything fancy. You just cut him the check, and you have a co-pilot next or on the other side from Hutchinson that we haven't had in a long time. And I just don't know if potentially this Barnes contract could make us not be able to do that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The one thing I will say about that is like he's not a backup linebacker, right? Like he might not play every snap, but he plays, I would say like probably 60 to 70%. And also take into account the fact that Anzalone's probably got a year or two left. And that's like, I mean, he's a 31 or 32 now. And obviously he had kind of a career resurgence here in Detroit, but I don't know if he's going to keep that play up. And I think what's going to happen, or the idea with this is next year we still have Anzalone as our Mike. Jack will play a little bit of Will, and then Barnes will be our Sam. What I think is going to happen is Anzalone is going to end up moving on. Jack will move to that Mike. Derek will play the Will, and then we'll have Rodrigo or somebody like that play that Sam, which what'll most likely happen is when we have a Sam, Barnes will be it, and then we'll put someone else at the Will just because Barnes is a bit better there. But I'm not quite as, negative on the signing as you are, but I definitely get where you're coming from, and I understand those points because, like I mentioned earlier, if that contract gets in the way of us doing something else, I don't know how to feel about that. But then moving on, which, I'm glad you mentioned this because this was the next point we were going to talk about anyway, was Harold Landry. He got cut, as you mentioned, and he was set to make, I believe, $17.5 million this season. The fact that, okay, let me say it this way. The fact that he got cut kind of concerns me, okay? Because $17.5 million is not that bad for someone who's a good pass rusher. Everything I heard over the trade deadline when the Lions were, interested in trading for Landry was that the Titans wanted like a 3 for him. And to go from wanting a 3 to cutting him is a big gap there. So I don't necessarily know how true that is that they were asking for a 3. But the fact that he got cut kind of worries me because I don't know what contract he's going to want in free agency or what he's going to get in free agency because he hasn't really, been that great. And let me look up his stats real quick so I'm not just talking out of my ass. He last year had 9 sacks, 10.5 the year before, and 12 the year before that. Which, obviously isn't bad, but we already have that on the roster, with Zadarius Smith. And he's only 28, like you mentioned, so he's not old, but he's not quite young. He's kind of right in his prime area. I would love to add him, for the right price, of course. It just kind of worries me that the Titans couldn't find a trade candidate for $17.5 million. But that also kind of makes me feel good because that means we should be able to re-sign him for less than, or, sign him in free agency for less than that. So I would, predict probably 12 to 15 million per year for him on like a 3-year deal, which isn't bad. I feel like that's not really that bad. As long as he can, as long as he can get back to that, double-digit sack number, that'll be a steal. But like I said, the fact that he was cut does kind of worry me. He doesn't have the best, run stopping ability, and that kind of worries me. I don't know how much of a hustle guy he is, which is kind of what the Lions look for in general. And just kind of looking at his stats here, last year he had actually, okay, I shut me up, PFF. He had a 49.6 pass rush grade and an 82.2 run D grade. So maybe he's just a better run defender than a pass rusher. And maybe that might be why he didn't really garner too much trade interest for that contract, because if you're paying 17.5, you're paying for a pass rusher. He was 63rd in total pressures with 30 last year and 19th in sacks with 9. It's not terrible, but it did seem he played a lot more run defense snaps than pass rush snaps. And he was 5th in total snaps in the league at his position. So he's playing a lot of downs, but it seems like he's more of a rotational pass rusher and a run stopper. So I was completely wrong, of course, as usual. And so basically with that being said, I do like the idea of adding him for the right price. And it kind of goes into that, pass rush by committee that I mentioned last podcast. Like, he'd be great as our number one guy on the other side, with Zadarius Smith coming in, with Pascal coming in, and maybe another free agent type coming in there. But with that being said, floor is yours, James.
Yeah, I like him a lot more than you, but that's perfectly fine. Different strokes for different folks. I'm actually surprised to hear how good of a run defender he is because he was someone that I wanted the Lions to draft. I remember watching him in college play, and I don't watch a ton of Tennessee football. Well, we played Tennessee last year, and he made a few plays. Now that I think about it, it's actually mostly run stuff that I saw him make. But he had, and I only say had because I'm referring to his college film. Because, like I said, it's not like I tune into all these Tennessee Titans games, though they were known for their defense this past year. I think his sack numbers could be down for lack of a running mate on the other side. I know they have Simmons, a fantastic defensive tackle, but they are going to get a third for him. Somebody will sign him to a decent amount of money. I was thinking maybe 15 a year, and that should give them a third round count pick. So they'll
Good
still get a
point.
third for him in a way, but in terms of totality, because I know I've been, especially on this podcast, harping about Garrett, Garrett, Garrett. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Miles Garrett, but if I can get Landry for just money instead of Garrett for two first plus, I'll go with Landry. It's just more bang for your buck. Like you said, he will help out with the pass rush by committee, so to speak. But I would expect, from my prior knowledge, him taking the reins and at least being that number two guy. And he, of course, defensive lines rotate all the time just to keep their legs fresh, all that. But I do think he would be the starter and that co-pilot, so to speak.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I do think if we signed him, he would definitely be the number one guy on the other side. Um, excuse me. But with that being said, I wanted to pose this question to the audience, and you can just drop this in the comments, and we'll discuss this after as well. There's three scenarios right now that everybody's talking about with Detroit and getting their pass rush fixed. There's number one, trading, let's just say two ones, let's just call it two ones for Miles Garrett and paying him 30 something million. So that's number one. Number two, trade a third and maybe a fifth or just our second for Trey Hendrickson and then give him like 25, 28, something like that per year. Or we could go and sign a guy like Landry for say, 15 million a year. And then maybe sign another guy like Pat Jones for like 7 or 8, which is, I've mentioned him every podcast because I'm just a big fan. And I think we should definitely bring him over. But which one would you rather have? Miles Garrett for 2 first rounders and 32 million or 35 million, whatever it's going to be. Trey Hendrickson for a second rounder and 28 million, or Harold Landry for 15 to 18 million. Oh my God, Geno Smith just got traded to the Raiders, bro.
But
Just now, Geno Smith just got traded to the Raiders.
for what?
Wow, for a third round pick.
Okay,
Wow.
so
Holy
who's quarterback in
crap.
Seattle?
Sam Howell, baby, the North Carolina Demon. Let's go. It's Sam Howell
Anyone?
season, son.
The funny thing is anyone that follows that or has been following me on X for a couple years, I really like Sam Howell.
Me
At least
too.
coming out as a prospect. I think he was not talked about nearly enough, but obviously he didn't flourish in the NFL. But I really liked him as a prospect. Now that
Right.
we've kind of seen him at least get his feet wet in the NFL, I don't know if I would want to hang my hat on him, but dang. Um, I knew at some point doing this 3 days a week, we'll have like breaking news during our segment. I did not think it would take the first week, but
Yeah,
okay.
that's pretty wild. And I mean, it's not. Let's kind of temper this down a little bit. It's a third round pick for Geno Smith. Okay, it's
Right.
not like what I mean. It's not like we
That
just
is true.
saw friggin' Russell Wilson, 3 first rounders. And I mean, I'm not saying it's not a crazy trade, but I talked about this Actually, I was going to talk about this. Funny enough, in my notes here, it mentions, or I mentioned, Raiders may trade for a veteran quarterback. So that kind of took that away from us. But to get back to Lion stuff, we'll talk more about Geno Smith in a second. But to get back to Lion stuff, yes, that's the question. Who would you rather have out of those three scenarios? I personally think I'm going Trey Hendrickson, only because I do think he's a lot better than Landry is. And I believe that if we get Trey Hendrickson for like a third and a fifth, man, we are in perfect contention. Didn't have to give too much for him on the draft capital. Didn't have to give too much money either, so we can still re-sign everybody. Um, but I just feel like Trey Hendrickson is the perfect running mate for Hutchinson. He has, the Campbell ties back in New Orleans. And I just feel that he fits exactly what we want. He's a pass rusher, but he has that hustle. He's like Hutch. He plays a lot like Hutch. And I just think having those guys across from each other would be perfect. Now, would I be mad if either other thing happened? No, not really. I'd be happy if we, signed Harold Landry for sure. I'd also be happy if we traded for Myles Garrett. But I have a feeling I know what you're going to say on this one.
I'm torn. Can we do all three? Can we give up two first, a third, and a fifth, and then just the money? We have all of them, and we can just go get. Obviously, we don't have the money for that. I'm torn. Bang for your buck. I think the most. How old is Hendricks? Do you by chance know how old he is?
30. He's 29. He'll be 30 when the season starts.
I'll actually go Hendrickson. He's I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure he's a team captain. If not, I know he was in the past. I've seen pictures with the C on his chest. He's already played next to DJ Reader for years, who we also have, so that way they have the familiarity for stunts and other things. Um, I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure I tried to find it in that quick section real quick, but I could not find it again. I think I have it on a screenshot on my phone. But I'll give a barrier just to be on the safe side, but he's in the top five in sacks in the league for the last 2 years combined. I'm pretty sure it's the number one, but he for 2 years combined. But he's also durable. I don't want to jinx the guy, but I'm pretty sure I also saw something that he hasn't missed a game in quite a while. And obviously, availability is the best ability. If literally anything, the Lions know that, especially now. Um, so I did want to try to quickly look up games played. Each of the last two
Yeah,
years,
I
at
do
least,
believe he's played
he's
most.
34 for 34 games. And he
Yeah.
actually, yeah, you know what? After looking up the stats, because I know he was good, um, I did film research on DJ Reader when we got him, and obviously he stood out as well. He was on the same tape, same field. He had, yeah, back-to-back seasons. For each of the last two seasons, both years he had exactly 17 and a half sacks. So I know sacks is just one stat. Everyone will, he's got a lot of quarterback hits. He's healthy, he's durable. Um, for only a third, and like I think you said a third and a fifth, either way, that's a steal. Um, for someone to he would be the bookend. He would end the committee. So as much as I would like Landry, and it would not cost us any picks because I know a third is not a lot, especially for a pass rusher getting 17 sacks. But Brad Holmes can do some magic with some of those picks in the middle rounds. Like I know every fourth round pick's not going to be St. Brown, but um, yeah, Hendricks would just completely end that committee. Not, I don't want to say nonsense, but it would just be him and Hutch, and everyone else would just be there to fill in when they need a breather. So after seeing he's got 35 sacks total in the last 2 years, he would be my main focus.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Trey Hendrickson, I think it was obvious as soon as he became available that we should be going after him. But moving on to the next Lions discussion point, Carlton Davis is not coming back to Detroit. Unfortunately, Dave Burkett reported today that it's likely, or Carlton Davis is quote unquote too pricey for the Lions, which, yeah, we'll see how that goes. Um, I don't know what the hell that was.
I'll say, was that
Um,
you?
no, I don't know what that was. Um, but apparently Carlton Davis was too pricey, and kind of like we talked about last podcast, we kind of figured that Jacksonville or somebody like that's going to offer him more money than we are, and that's totally fine. The only problem with that is now the Lions have to pivot, and we have to, sign somebody else. I don't really see Darius Slay coming in and being the guy for us this year. At least I hope not. I love Slay, I really do. I'll tell you a small story about Darius Slay. The first time I went to a Lions training camp, I was sitting, this was years ago, this was Matt Patricia days. I was sitting in the front bench, and that was like 5 feet away from the fence or 10 feet away from the fence. So, the Patriots were there, and Tom Brady's like 15 feet away from me, Matt Stafford's 20 feet away from me, and I'm just like freaking out. I'm like a 16-year-old kid. And I'm just like looking around watching, and me and Darius Slay locked eyes for like 5 seconds, right? And he just hits me with a "Sup, bro?" And I was like, as a 16-year-old, my life was made. I was like, this is the coolest shit ever. So just, I say that to say I love Darius Slay. Darius Slay is one of my favorite players in the whole NFL. But with that being said, I don't feel comfortable relying on a 35-year-old corner. I don't care who you are. Your name could be Darrelle Revis. I don't feel comfortable relying on a 35, 36-year-old corner to be the number one guy on a Super Bowl winning team. I know he just did it last year, but we're a bit different. But
I mean, he
we're a
literally
bit
was just
different
the
than the
number one
Eagles.
corner on the Super Bowl team.
Yeah. And that's great, but we also don't have the defensive line the Eagles have. Now, if we went and made that trade for Trey Hendrickson, I might feel a bit better about
Yeah.
having Slay as our number one guy. But with that being said, I still think people are kind of discounting Rakestraw a little bit, and I think that's okay. Call me crazy. I think Brad Holmes had this in his head. We traded third for Carlton Davis and a fifth or whatever it was,
Yeah.
and then we let Carlton leave, and he gives us a comp pick back. We take a corner with the first and second pick. We're good. We basically just got a free year of Carlton Davis, if you think about it that way. And I mean, obviously having to take a second round and a first round pick for corners isn't great, but hopefully Rakestraw can play. But with that being said, corners are not that deep on the free agency market this year, so they're going to command a lot of money. And with that being said, if Davis is too expensive, the other guys probably will be too, outside of, a Darius Slay or, somebody like a Rasul Douglas who has played at a decent level the last few years. He is getting kind of old. And really the hope is right now for Lions fans that Terry and Arnold can be our number one. That's We can cross our fingers and hope and pray that that happens. Because if that happens, we're in a lot better spot without Davis. Now, moving on, Jonathan Allen was cut, and I only bring this up in this segment because I keep hearing him. The Lions should sign Jonathan Allen. No, they fucking shouldn't. Why would we do that? I don't understand this at all. It's like, what are you thinking? Like, what are we gonna do? Pay $60 million to defensive tackles that we fucking rotate? Like what? Like we got DJ Reader and Aleem McNeil. They're already making like I think DJ's making 16 and Aleem's making 24 or 25. So we're talking, almost $40 million between two defensive tackles. Actually, 40 million, over 40 million, about 41. Um, we signed Jonathan Allen for probably 12 to 15 million a year. We're talking like 65 million just to one position, and they don't even play every snap. Like it sounds cool, but this ain't Madden, man. I'm gonna just leave it at that. Like Jonathan Allen should not even be on people's minds, in my opinion. We should be worried about edge rushers, and I think that's the problem. Is people are just, oh, pass rush, pass rush. We need a good D line. They don't think about the true roles behind all of these teams or behind all of these positions. But with that being said, do you have anything on any of that?
Yeah, I would love to have him, and I would willing to give him, like 20 million a year or whatever it takes to get him. No, I'm just playing. But I wouldn't mind if we do add him, pending price. Once again, I'm going to be a broken record. I would almost hear anyone out for the right price. Everyone's got their price. Like you said, we do
Yeah.
have two expensive. D tackles. I mean, don't get me wrong, they both earned it. DJ Reader is a beast, has been a beast. I know he had kind of a quiet year this year, but I do think that was heavily impacted by Hutchinson's injury. Um, my big thing this time last year was how are you going to guard Reader, who's not a typical pass rusher per se. He doesn't get a lot of sacks, but he is a pocket collapser. He does force the quarterback to move, hopefully into Hutchinson's arms. And once Hutch went down, you just double team Reader, and I mean, no disrespect to Reader, but it's 2-on-1. It's hard to do, and that was impacted even further once McNeil got hurt too. But I like Reader. I like McNeil. I don't know. I heard, I don't want to say rumors, but I'll just say whispers that McNeil might not be ready to start the year because he got hurt so late into the year. So once again, pending price, maybe Allen would make sense for a cheap 1 year contract if he's willing to do that. I have no idea, obviously. And then, like you said, not only going back to the contracts, do we have two expensive D tackles, but we are either going to extend Hutch or we are at least talking about extending Hutch. So if you have 40, 50 million in D tackles, you might pay one D end another 35. You got to cut costs somewhere. And that kind of all circles back to I like Derek Barnes. Like I don't want to say I'm not crapping on him as a player. He's perfectly fine. I'd welcome him on my team any day. But at 8.5 million, it's money's tight. We don't have enough money as is to bring back some starters like Carlton Davis. So I'm glad we brought him back and whatnot. Don't get me wrong, but we got to start picking and choosing, and it's one of those good problems to have. You've been a Lions fan for a long time. We've talked in the past and whatnot. There's been days where there's been years where we let people go and just no one even wants them. Like it doesn't even matter. Lions cut this player and he's just bagging groceries at Kroger or something because no one else wants him. We have to make decisions and either cut players or just make a decision not to offer them the money they want that are going to go be starters. It's a good problem to have, and we're in good hands with Brad Holmes. He hits on so many of his draft picks. We'll find cheap starters that we might not even know their names right now in the fourth and fifth round this year. But I do worry about the cap situation, like you were saying, if we were to try to even remotely get an Allen or someone like that. I would probably pass on him. I don't think he's willing to take that small, short-term, short money deal, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I would sign him for 1 year, 5, 8 million max, but
Yeah,
he's not going to take that, unfortunately. And I would prefer to just draft somebody. I mean, this is such a deep interior
yeah,
defensive line class that I do agree. Defensive tackle is kind of a need. Levi Onwuzurike is probably leaving in free agency. Broderick Martin hasn't really become much. We do have Makai Wingo waiting in the wings, who got injured late in the year last year. But like to your point, McNeil might not be ready by week 1, and that kind of takes our rotation down even more. But I would just draft maybe even two. Shit, take one in the third, take one in the fifth, and just call it a day. I feel like with how good this class is, you might as well. Especially with Reader being older, we can kind of revamp that entire position in one foul swoop.